Hello, my name is Carrie Meyer. I'm an accredited genealogist. Welcome to Using French Church Records. Okay, so using church records in France is actually kind of fun. French records are excellent. They contain a lot of information. But if you don't read French, don't worry. Today we're going to go ahead and cover some of the basics, so even if you are not a French speaker or able to read French, you're going to still be able to find what you need in French records. So just to let you know, FamilySearch and Ancestry.com, they have indexed a lot of French records, but for the most part, digital image records are not actually available on these sites. A few are, but most aren't. So in that case, you're going to have to actually go to the French National Archives website. It will be in French, but you should have the option with Google. There should be an option to translate into English so that you're able to navigate the site easily. Now, the records themselves, they are obviously going to be in French. They're not going to be translated or indexed or transcribed, however you want to say it, into English, but you will be able to navigate the site, at least in English. You'll find a lot of images that are digitized there so that you can actually go through the parish record books, which is great. Now, I do want to point out that this class assumes that you have already pinpointed where in France your ancestor is from. This class isn't going to teach you how to make that jump. So, assuming you have already figured out what department or region in France your family is from and what town or parish, then this class is for you. So, we're going to talk about a few basic record types. The Catholic Church, they had several records, but these are the basic ones that we're going to cover. So in the parish register, you're going to find indexes. They're called the table décennale. Now, I'll let you know right now, for all of you who are good at speaking French, my pronunciation isn't great, so I'll do my best. So there's the index, or the table décennale. There's the birth and christening records, the naissance, the marriage records or mariage, and there's the death or burial, décès or sepulture, that we're going to cover today. Okay, so the first thing I want you to pay attention to is the index, or table décennale. Most of them are going to be handwritten. You are going to find some that are typewritten, which is great, but for the most part, they're going to be handwritten. So some of the words that will be helpful to you when you're looking at this particular document. So we've got over here, look on this right side, there's the nom, which is the name referring specifically to the surname. There's prénom, first name, date, date, jour, day, mois, the month, année, the year or years, and this is the number of the act. In other words, you see over here the 1, 2, 3, 4. So most of the books are organized specifically by the act, or the I guess ordinance that's being performed. So if it's a christening or a baptism, all the baptisms are going to be listed together. So it's going to be, and the books are usually organized by year. So let's say you're looking at book for the year of 1807. So it's going to give you a list of, this was number 1 is the first baptism of the year 1807, number 2, etc., etc. Okay, so generally speaking, this is how the books are going to be organized. So usually what's going to happen, as I said, it's usually going to be by year. Sometimes you're going to have more than one year, like more than 1 year compiled together in one book. So what will happen is there will be a page at the beginning that says, for example, this is the year 1807. Then in this case, it looks like there were 12 baptisms performed that year. And actually on this register, I believe this is 1813. But so there are 12 baptisms that were performed that year. So you'll have the page that tells you this is for, in this case, the year 1813, and then there will be the actual documents for those 12 baptisms. And then the very last page is going to be the table décennale, or the index. So if you are not really good with reading French, I would suggest you go to this last page and go through the index. It'll help you, especially if it's handwritten. It's a lot harder to get through all the records if you don't read French and if you aren't good with old handwriting. So use the index. It'll help you, and then it'll help you go back through. And if you say, for example, you find your person that you're looking for, and it's baptism number 6, and this happened on the 26th of February. Well, then you know to go back through the records, and you can find it pretty easily. Just count 1, 2, 3, count through 6, and you can find it. And so the table is a really helpful tool. So additional things that you should know. In France has historically had several ethnic groups who speak their own unique language in addition to the national language, which is French. They live in France. They've always historically lived in France, but they are not necessarily native French speakers. There are a lot of other groups. So one of the things that you can run into when doing French records is the fact that there are different variations on names, and this will manifest itself when you're looking at the table. So, as I said, French is the national language of France. So if you're looking at some of the minority groups, for example, there are several, but some of the big examples are the Alsatians up in the region by Germany. There are the Basque down by Spain in the Pyrenees Mountains. There are the Bretons in Brittany, and they're descendants of the Celts. So there's quite a variety. So what a person's actual name was may not be recorded in the table décennale. The index will likely have the name recorded in French. For example, let's look at an Alsatian variation. So the name would be Jacob or Jacob in German, but in French it's Jacques. So in the table, you are likely to find the person recorded as Jacques, but then when you go to and find the actual record, then he might actually be recorded under his given name, what his parents actually called him, Jacob. There's also the Latin. Latin was the language of the church, of the Catholic Church, so the parish priest may have recorded the name in Latin, which in this case would be Jacobus. So just please keep that in mind. Don't get into a panic and think, oh, I found the wrong person. Or you go into the index and you see that there's a baptism for Jacques, but then you go through and you can't find any baptisms for Jacques, but you do find one for Jacobus. Okay, you found the right person. So just don't get hung up on it being exactly the same. So that's just something you should be aware of. Some of the variations that are kind of common is, for example, Magdalena would be a German variation of Madeline, or you'll have Anna Maria instead of Anne Marie. So just things like that. Another thing that you should keep in mind when looking at French records is, or French names, is the French don't necessarily use the names the way we in our English-speaking minds expect them to be used. For example, it wasn't uncommon to find a man with the name Marie in front of his name. So Marie Joseph or Marie Jean. Okay, these are men. So don't think that you have found a woman when it's actually a man. Also, in our American minds, typically in America, not always, but often, names like Noelle, Michelle, Renee are girls' names to our minds. In France, these can be girls' names, but typically they're male names. Another thing to look out for is names that we might not think of as girls' names, like Sebastian or Frederick, can be girls' names. If they have an E on the end, that indicates it's a girl rather than a boy. So those are just things to keep in mind before you get started in using the records. So just be aware of that. Okay, another thing to know before we move on to the actual records is there is what is called the French Republican calendar. It was used in France from 1793 to 1805. This was a result of the French Revolution. They wanted to get rid of everything that was typical to the way things were before the Revolution. And so they even changed their calendar. So be aware of that. It was in use for 12 years approximately. They usually denoted these years in Roman numerals. So year 1 would be in the Roman numeral, capital I. They had 10 days of the week. This is a list of names of the month that could help you. Vendémiaire, Brumaire, Frimaire, and like I say, I'm probably not pronouncing these well, but just you can find a list of these if you type in French Republican calendar on Google. Also, if you go into FamilySearch, there is an option that if you type in the date, it will translate it to the regular Julian calendar. So I just want you to be aware that this was a situation. So if you go into your index or tab décennal and find something along the lines of year 3, and then it says that your ancestor was born on the 2nd of Vendémiaire, year 3, you're not imagining things. This is just the French Republican calendar. Okay, so let's get into birth records. These are some of the words that you should know, and these are kind of the things that you can typically expect to find in birth records. Okay, so some of the words to know are fille is son, and I think I'm pronouncing it wrong again. I think it's fils is son, fille is daughter, né is born, baptisé, baptized, parrain, godfather, marraine, godmother, mariage légitime, legitimate child, illegitimate, illegitimate. Usually only the mother is going to be named in that case. And then there's residence and occupation, which are the same in English. Okay, so some of the things that you can expect to find in a birth record. You can expect to find the name of the child and their parents. You can expect to find their baptismal date. Oftentimes, their birthplace will be included as well, and the residence of the family. So if they're baptized at a church that isn't a neighboring town, it'll usually include their residence if they're in what town the family actually lives in. Okay, some things that can also be found but aren't necessarily a guarantee. You can also often find the ages of the parents that are listed in this birth record, the occupation of the parents, whether or not a child was legitimate, and like I said, if they were illegitimate, in most cases the father will not be named. The name of the godparents will often be included, and this is an important clue because generally speaking, godparents were family members, so it's important to kind of note those, and it can help you later on if you continue to trace the family. So French records are often really detailed, and it can help you be sure you're tracing the right family, especially since a lot of times you'll get a lot of names that are really common, like Anne-Marie or Jacques or Francois, that are used over and over again. The fact that they will tell you specifically what town the father was born in, what his age was, and what his occupation was, and the same for the mother in most cases, it helps you be sure that you've identified all the children for the same couple, because it makes it a little easier to know that it's still the same Anne-Marie or the same Francois. Okay, let's move on to marriage records. Okay, so these are your vocabulary words for marriage. Mariage, marriage, excuse me. La mariée is the bride. Jean marié is the groom. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this, but basically what this is a dispensation or special permission to marry because of close relationship. So the Catholic Church required permission in some cases. For example, if a stepdaughter were to marry her father, or excuse me, her stepfather after her mother died, or if first cousins were to marry, a lot of times it will give you what the relationship was, and there will be permission from the parish priest or the bishop of the area allowing them to be married despite their close relationship. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Veuve, widow. Veuf, widower. Mère, mother. Père, father. Décédé, deceased. Residence, and occupation, or however, again. Okay, so these are some of the things that you can expect to find in marriage records. You can expect to find the names of the bride and groom, their marriage date and place, their ages, what the occupation of both of them were, and where they actually lived. Often, the records will include whether or not the bride or groom has been widowed. So if they've been married previously, a lot of times that will be included in the marriage record of the current marriage. So the name of the deceased spouse is often listed. Names of the parents of the bride and groom are often listed. Now, you're not going to find that in the older records, like the really old ones, but in quite a few, you will find the names of the parents. You will find the age of the parents, their residence, and their occupations a lot of times too. Okay, and sometimes you'll also get a list of the guests who attended the wedding. So that can also be helpful because, again, friends obviously attend weddings, but a lot of family members do too. So it's helpful to kind of get an idea of who might be family. And finally, we will move on to death or burial records, and these are your vocabulary words. Décédé, deceased. Sepulture, burial. Enterrement is also burial. Âge, age. Fils, son. Fille, daughter. Again, residence. Veuve, widow. Veuf, widower. So let's talk about what you can expect to find in death records. Okay, the death records will obviously include the name of the deceased. It will include when and where they died and their age. It will also include the name, age, and residence of the informant or the person who provided the death information. Obviously, most people didn't die at church or necessarily even in a hospital, so those who died at home or wherever, somebody comes to report the death. That information, detailed information on the informant is also provided. Often, the name of the spouse of the deceased will be included. Not always, but a lot of times. So if their spouse survived them, it will usually give the name and their current residence. If they died previous to the individual, a lot of times the deceased spouse will be named. And what's really nice is a lot of times it will include the deceased spouse death place as well as their death date. So that's really nice because sometimes you're not going to find the records for everything. So it's really kind of lovely to have the deaths of both people included in one record. So sometimes you can hope for that, and that's really nice when that happens. And sometimes it will name the parents of the deceased, and occasionally it will tell you whether or not they're still living and if they are, where. So those are some of the things that you can expect to find, and then hopefully these are helpful tips on how to use the records. Again, just keep these vocabulary words close by and be sure that you take advantage of the table décennale or the index. It'll help make your search a lot faster. So I hope this was helpful information, and I thank you for taking the time to watch.